So yeah, hi. It feels super weird to be talking not about physics and optics because my whole life was physics and optics until this year, and then now it's not. So it feels pretty weird. But I hope you'll see that like optics and physics is a thread that runs through the whole thing. Um, and just to say as well, everything that Barbara said, I was like, yes, that's exactly what I would say. So great presentation, good advice. Um, so I thought I would explain first what I do. So I make jewelry, usually engagement rings and wedding rings from unusual gemstones. So unusual gemstones are ones, basically gemstones that I find interesting. So things like lab created gems, which still aren't really, they're popular amongst consumers, but traditional retailers just don't really know what to do with them. So they don't touch them. Um, and also natural gemstones that are kind of unusual, like maybe they came from a really specific place. Maybe I know exactly where they came from and whose hands they passed through, which is another really unusual thing in the world of gemstones. And any gemstone that tells a story, that's kind of what I'm into. So this example is one, this is actually, is a bad example because it's one ring that I made for myself, which is a really bad habit to get into. But the reason that I show it is that it's lab-grown diamonds and lab-grown alexandrite. So the alexandrite in the middle is a really interesting material because it changes color. So in daylight, it's this kind of green teal color, and in the like incandescent lighting, it's a red purple color. So it's a beautiful gemstone from that perspective. But also this material was originally created for laser rods. So it's from the 1980s Department of Defense in America, laser rod material. And I never really thought about this when I was in optics, but when they make a batch, a boule of material, lab created material, and it doesn't quite turn out to have the properties that they wanted, maybe they got the doping level a little bit wrong, maybe there's just too many inclusions, maybe it got contaminated, but you make kilograms of this stuff at a time, like what happens to it if it's no good? And what surprised me was to learn that a lot of this material makes its way into the gem world. So a lot of often just kind of hobbyist gem cutters will pick up synthetic material and work with it. So this is a piece that I managed to track down from a couple of gem cutters in Canada, and they cut this for me. So what I really like about this is that the gemstone has like a story. It's kind of an unusual story, like a particularly unusual story, but that the story of this gemstone mirrors my own story out of optics, out of lasers, and out of defense, and now into the jewelry world. And that's kind of why why I exist, why this company exists, is to help other couples, other people like me, to tell the story that they want to tell with the jewelry that they wear. Because we do this with everything, like the way that we decorate our homes, the way that we buy our clothes. Like we want to say something about ourselves, about our stories, about our values. And like natural diamonds don't always do that, despite many decades of pretty extensive marketing. So this is what I do. Why the name? So Saint Tenu, you might know her already from the mural. You might have seen this at the end of the road by the uni. I never knew who she was. I never knew the name. It's another spelling of Saint Enoch. So Saint Enoch, Saint Tenu, was a co-patron saint of Glasgow, along with her son, Saint Mungo, who's shown also in the mural. So that was where I came up with the name, also because the domain name wasn't taken, so I could choose it quite safely. And the weird thing is, the mural on the left, that went up recently, and it's at the end of the road where my new studio is. So every time I come to my new jewelry studio, every time I come in and out, there's her portrait at the end of the road on the end of a building staring at me. I just think it's like the weirdest coincidence. So how did I get here? How did I get here? It's a bit of a weird one to hear Barbara say she doesn't like these diagrams because they don't show all the weird twists and turns, because actually here I'm going to show you all the weird twists and turns, all the things that didn't work out. And it's a bit of it's a career path, but I guess I kind of consider it like a bit of a career graveyard, because it's everything that you see here is things that I was really excited to do at the time, and I'm really glad that I did them. But now I look back and I think I'm so glad I'm not doing that anymore. Everything's taught me something, but it's nice to move on and to evolve and not to stay the same, I guess. So my career started out pretty typical, to be honest. I came down to Glasgow from the north coast of Scotland and did chemical physics. And during that, I got to do a whole bunch of lab work, I guess. So a couple of summer projects one of them in inorganic chemistry, which taught me that I didn't really want to be a chemist, which was kind of handy for doing my degree in chemical physics. And then I spent a year at AMOF in Amsterdam, which I think is kind of a similar culture to ICFO. There seems to be like a lot of collaboration and crossover between ICFO and AMOF. It's like a really young environment, really fertile environment, lots of people with lots of really good ideas, and it's really well funded as well. It was a great place to spend a year. So I decided that I would join the same group that I was with in AMOF for my PhD. But in the meantime, while I came back to Glasgow to finish my degree, they had moved to Mainz in Germany. So I went to join them in Mainz, and I only stayed there for 3 days. So I got to Mainz to start the PhD, and I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to stay in academia. I'd start to have some doubts, and it wasn't a city that I could imagine really spending the next 3 years in. So rather than sign up all the paperwork that I was supposed to, I just hopped on a plane and came back to Glasgow. So that was a pretty weird decision to make at the time, bit of a scary decision to make at the time, but it's the best decision I ever made. So I came back to Glasgow, and I moved into my boyfriend's parents' attic for a little bit and started looking for jobs, which sounds a bit scarier than it was, but it totally felt like the right choice. It didn't really feel so scary. So I found a job as an assistant buyer at Amici, and Amici is actually a lot like Meet Optics, but for biotech and pharma companies. So it's like when a biotech and pharma company is really small and they don't have their own procurement department, they just want to outsource it to someone who knows better than they do. So Amici is like the outsourced procurement department and runs a platform like Meet Optics with like all the different big suppliers, all of their products listed, and it saves everyone so much time and so much money. So that was a really good experience for me. I learned a lot about business there. And then I joined Thales, so I wanted to get back to the technical side of things. I was really missing physics. So didn't know this was a job that people could do, but it is, and it's a really great one actually. So turns out it was kind of my dream job. So I was designing camera lenses, designing laser products. If you saw Ashley's talk last month, my job was really, really similar to Ashley's. So I was there for 7 years. And while I was there, to be honest, like I reconsidered my decision a lot while I was there. So I interviewed with lots of different companies. I looked at other jobs in the same company. Like I thought about moving into project management. I thought about moving into another type of engineering. But every time I would compare the other option against what I was doing, and I always ended up choosing optical design. It was really my dream job. But now I'm not an optical design engineer. So what happened to make it not my dream job anymore? When I was preparing this, I was finding it kind of hard to remember, like, what was it that really changed my mind so dramatically? And it sounds a little bit weird to say it, but a lot of the reason for it was like listening to podcasts. So I started listening to podcasts and discovering that people started companies. I don't think I had ever really thought before about where companies came from. I just didn't know that people started companies and that people like me started companies. I just kind of thought it would always be like these big business people. It wasn't like me at all. So when I started to realize that people could start companies, people like me could start companies, I was like, that looks like a lot of fun. I would like to start a company. But I didn't have any good ideas. I didn't have a sheet of 30 good ideas, that's for sure. I had a sheet of about 5 really bad ideas. And then, so I was kind of just looking always for the right idea. And then Johnny proposed at the end of 2017 with a placeholder ring and said that we could go shopping together. And I was so looking forward to this. I thought it was going to be a really nice experience. We could go and buy or design my engagement ring together. And what we found was like a really bad experience. We just had a really terrible time. And we came away from all the jewelers that we met feeling like patronized. We came away feeling poor. We came away just feeling like we were in the wrong place, that we weren't welcome. It was such a weird experience. So that was great news because now I had a problem to solve and I could get started. So I got a bit obsessed. I didn't wear jewelry before. I didn't know anything about jewelry before. But to be honest, it's just material science and design. So I got stuck in. I just started learning and then started moonlighting with St. Tenu. So I was still working as a design engineer through 2018 and most of all of 2019. While working on this, I incorporated the business 2019 in the summer, and I've been doing it ever since, part-time and now all of a sudden full-time. So in February, I realized that working from home, I feel weird to say it because it was a different world, but back then in February, it was really weird to be working from home and telling people like, oh, I don't have a studio that you can visit. It felt like I wasn't taking it seriously enough. So I realized I was going to need a studio and I was going to need to do it full time. So I resigned, handed in my notice at the end of February, and then everything changed. So in March, the same week that I was supposed to be signing the lease for the studio, it was the week that we were all getting sent home from work. And I was like, I can't sign this lease. This is just business suicide. It's not going to work out. So just like in mines, I just didn't sign the lease and I ran away. And again, it was a really great decision. So instead of taking on that studio, I took on a shared premises at Vanilla Ink in the East End, just by that big mural. So I work from there now with other jewellers in the same place, and I'm working on it full time. So it's a bit of a weird kind of career path in some ways. Like in some ways it's really traditional, going from academia to industry, but there's been a lot of dramatic U-turns along the way as well. But I think that that's quite normal for a lot of people. So what do I do now? So the way that a ring comes together, typically, sometimes you're involved in all the steps and sometimes you're not. This is an example where I was involved in all the steps. So this is Montana sapphire in the middle, sapphire that comes from Montana in America. And it starts out life as this kind of chunk of, it looks like a chunk of sea glass. So in the hand of Michelle, the gem cutter, there you can see the rough that she had me choose from. So I chose the one on the end, the teal colored one. And she cut it into this pattern, which was a pattern of her own design. This is another thing that I think is really interesting, is that gem cutters, if they design their own faceting patterns, it's really just optical design, but for gemstones, it's using the same software pretty much, like ray tracing CAD software. But you're optimizing, I guess, for beauty really, rather than anything else. So this is kind of an unusual example because it's not normal that you get to see where your ring came from. You just usually pick it up off the shelf and nobody ever really asks about the implications of where it came from, who made it, were they well paid, was it safe? But I really like this one because I can say exactly which mine it came from. I can tell you about their environmental standards. I can tell you about Michelle, the gem cutter. She's a bioscientist by day and she's a gem cutter by night. There's like a nice story to go along with it. But what actually has to happen for this piece of jewellery to be brought to life? Because it's not just the gem cutting and the setting of the stones and the metal. There's so much more to it than that. So this is like what a typical day, or hopefully not every day, quite a busy day if it's this one, but it's such a varied day. I kind of wanted to get that across, that I'm doing the work of like every department in the company, but it's so interesting. I learned so much doing it. And even if you don't enjoy something so much, you can kind of just shrink it or outsource it to somebody else eventually, and you can grow the bits that you really do enjoy. So for me, in amongst all of this, things that I enjoy the most, it's the designing in CAD. So when I started, I didn't know CAD well enough to do it myself. So I was always outsourcing the CAD work. But now I've learned more. I've learned more about the manufacturability of what I do, and I've learned more about the software that I use, and now I can do it myself. And I really enjoy doing it myself. It's kind of nice. It's really nice to bring something to life and see it go from in your mind to on the screen to real life. But it's a super varied day, and what I kind of want to point out is that I didn't know how to do any of this before I started. It's not like I magically had this knowledge. Like I didn't have any of this knowledge, but I picked it all up, not by going back to uni, not by taking on any like official courses. A lot of it I've picked up from podcasts, YouTube videos, blogs, Instagram captions, like just all over the place. But once you've got a problem to solve, once you've got something that you're really passionate about, then to be honest, I kind of find that the answers find their way to you. You just keep your eyes open and everything starts to fall into place. So some tips. Let me just check how I'm doing for time. Cool. Oh, these are okay. I think these are some quite good tips. These are things that are, I think they're relevant whether you're thinking about going along the entrepreneurial path, industrial path, academic path, whatever. They're like pretty broad, but they're things that I really wish I had known sooner. So number one, experimental mindset. This is such a game changer and it totally saves your mental health. If you don't really grow attached to the outcome of something that you're trying to do, if your only aim is to learn as much as you can for spending as little as possible, because like Barbara, this is all bootstrapped, then you're going to be happy no matter what the outcome. Even if it all goes horribly wrong, you learn something really important, so it was worth it. So keeping an experimental mindset it'll save you, I think. DIY apprenticeship, I felt really uncomfortable for a long time about the way that I was learning things. I saw people going to California to take proper gemology degrees, and I was like, is anyone going to take me seriously if I don't have the letters after my name? But actually, I've come to realize, especially since COVID, as a lot of the traditional courses have come online and I've started to like listen into them, I realize that they're not actually teaching anything that I couldn't teach myself. And maybe it takes a little bit longer, maybe everything's not packaged up so nicely, but also maybe you get some more diverse viewpoints, you get some more obscure information from basically, like, if you can find out where the nerds are hanging out on a topic and just hang around in the same place, you will learn so much. So a DIY apprenticeship is totally valid way of learning. You're probably totally used to this already, but like don't let it make you feel like an imposter. It's totally valid. Find what's hard work for others but feels like play to you. I thought this one was an interesting one because for me, a lot of the stuff that you would have seen on the previous slide, the things that I do are they kind of come naturally sometimes. So like I was always really into photography, always really into graphic design, and then like the material science side of things has really, really helped. But for some people, I know like that would be a nightmare. They don't want to have to take pictures. They don't enjoy it. Graphic design, they have no idea where to begin. Like it would be so much harder for somebody else sometimes to do the same job. So you might find that your background, your skills, your hobbies, how you grew up and what you've done since then, they all kind of combine and make you this really unique, have this really unique skill set, which makes you perfectly suited to something that everybody else would find completely impossible. The 1,000-day rule, this one I'm not totally sure if it's true, but so far it seems to be working out to be true for me, and it seems to be true for a lot of other people. So the idea that if you quit your corporate job to start your own company, it's going to take about 1,000 days before you're earning as much as you were earning before you quit. So if you think that maybe it's going to take you a year to earn what you were going to be earning, and you're not earning it after a year, well, that might be a tricky financial position, but it's not that you were bad at what you did. It's not that you were like slow at what you did. It's that it seems to just typically be about 1,000 days for people to get to that point. So I guess number one, like bear it in mind. You're going to need to keep your day job for maybe a bit longer than you thought you were, or have a whole lot more savings than you thought you did, because 1,000 days is quite a long time. And not to lose heart in the meantime as well. Money, I can't stress enough just the freedom that having some money has given. So I've saved up money from my jobs before, and that's what's given me the freedom to take risks, to try things, to buy stock. It's kind of easy in some ways because everything I do pretty much is bespoke. So people pay me before I make their products. So I don't have to worry too much about money in that way. But I also still have to do things as an experiment. So I need to be able to fund that myself. And it's also given me the time. I don't have to stress too much about deadlines. I don't have to sell everything that I make because I've got a bit of time to let things play out as they should. This is one that's become quite obvious quite recently. And I think you might come across this in your own careers, and it might be a handy thing to know. Keep an eye out for endangered skills. There's a huge opportunity there. So especially in the UK, I notice that a lot here anyway, that at some point in the past, we started offshoring a lot of our skills. We stopped investing in apprentices. And so there's a lot of skills, really specialized skills, where there might be a few people at the age of like 50 or 60 who are still doing it, but there's very, very few younger people who've been trained to do it. So if you come across people like that and it's a topic that you enjoy, so optical design for me was one of them. There used to be an optical design course in London. They stopped doing the course. Now the UK doesn't really have any optical design engineers. So if you find yourself in that position where you can become like the expert just because there's basically nobody else doing it, that's such a valuable position to be in. So I mention it in case you can watch out and you might find yourself in that situation, and just know that you're sitting on a gold mine, basically. Finally, you can invent your own job. This is true whether you're really starting your own company or you're in a corporate environment. You make the rules. You make up your own job. So for example, with optical design, I was never really very good at bench work. So I just didn't really do it very much. And I kept doing the things that I did enjoy doing. And over time, your role just kind of becomes what suits you best, and the gaps get filled in other ways. So yeah, take the power for yourself. You invent your own job. So that's me. I was going to show you the picture on the right because above is the CAD model and below is the photo. And I think it always helps to see just how similar they are. Especially at the moment, I'm working remotely with all my clients and showing them what their ring is going to become before it's ever made. And I know it can be a bit scary. Like, you don't know if it's going to turn out exactly as it should, but it does. It turns out exactly as it should. So it's kind of a reassuring thing. And I guess I mention it because it wouldn't have been possible a few years ago to make renders of this quality, to share it so easily with people. But because of technology, now it's totally possible. And yeah, you can get in touch anytime if you want to ask any questions about engagement rings, but also optics, or what it's like working in a corporate environment from somebody who no longer works in a corporate environment. I'm like totally happy to have a chat, so get in touch anytime.
All right, thank you so much for that, Megan. That was great. First question is from Mathieu about when you started up. What sort of podcasts were you listening to at the time?
Yes, I should have mentioned this. Thank you so much for asking. How I Built This is the #1 podcast recommendation that I have. I love How I Built This. But there's also a very specific episode of one podcast that I also love, if you can track it down. It's the Indie Hackers podcast. And the guest was Danielle Baskin. She's just like the coolest entrepreneur. So she makes, it's going to sound weird, but things like sweaters for drones. So your drone battery runs out faster in cold weather. So she knits sweaters for drones, and it took off. Also like branded fruit. She discovered like you can just like laser burn like a corporate logo onto fruit, and then corporations will buy it and give it away at their conferences. So she comes up with all these like ridiculous ideas, but then just puts up a web page, and then they seem to gain traction. So that was a really, really good episode, Indie Hackers with Danielle Baskin. Yeah.
Wow. Just another one from Polias Jonusas. Sorry about that pronunciation. Seeing as you took a slightly different approach to learning the skills that you've developed for your career through subreddits, podcasts, things like that, have you ever felt criticized or stigmatized from folk who have kind of felt that you haven't done this properly?
You know, it's funny. I felt it myself. I felt embarrassed, but nobody else has ever made me feel that way. It was all in my head. But that's kind of why I mention it, because I want you to know that you don't have to feel that way. There's definitely, among like traditionally trained jewelers who typically gone through an apprenticeship and spent decades at the bench, if you say you want to become a jeweler, then they'll probably say it can't be done, you have to do it through an apprenticeship. But what they don't tell you is that apprenticeships don't really exist. Not that they don't exist anymore, but not at the same scale that they did before. There used to be workshops that would have 20 people and they'd have 5 apprentices. And now it's like a workshop with 2 people and they probably don't have an apprentice. So it's all very well saying, oh, that's not the way we learned back in my day. But the way that they learned back in their day doesn't exist anymore. So too bad. Don't worry too much about the stigma.
I suppose in that case, it's always the phrase that you are your own worst critic, and therefore you should be your own best cheerleader, because otherwise no one else is going to motivate you. With that in mind, you seem to have developed really good clarity of thought and determination about all your big career changes and life choices. Could you elaborate slightly about your decision-making process here? Was it kind of a big list of pros, cons? Was it a big gut feeling? Was it something else?
Interesting question. I think if I could sum it up, or maybe if I could sum up a conversation I had with my dad, because my dad's like a company man, always like, you know, low risk would be a good career for you. And I was, you know, on this like very like acceptable career choice, you know, go to uni, get a degree, well, he wasn't so happy when I quit the PhD, but then just like get a regular job and don't take too many risks. That was always the kind of upbringing. But then at some point, it felt like it would be too risky to stay where I was. I was worried that I would wake up when I was 50 or 60 and realize that like wasted my life, wasted my potential, and just not made the most of it. And then once you start to feel that way, it doesn't feel like a risk to do something new. It feels more like a risk to stay where you are, because you can see the path that it's taken on you and you know that you don't want to be there. So it's weird. The same move can look to somebody else like a really risky move, but to you in your shoes, it's clear as day that it's the only choice. Like there isn't even a choice to be made. It's just what has to happen. You just have to be brave enough to go through with it. So I hope that helps.
That's really good advice. Thank you. On a slightly different note about the business itself, I think we've got a bit of a romantic, because Niels is asking, what's the price range of engagement rings that you're offering?
That's a really good question. So typically they start at around £1,000. Everything I work on is like solid gold, solid platinum, always recycled as well. And that's one of the great things about lab-grown gems, actually, is that you can make an engagement ring for about £1,000, whereas if it was with natural diamonds, it might cost more like £4,000, £6,000, £10,000, £20,000. You know, it's I was a bit worried when, of course, when COVID hit, and I was like, oh my God, is anyone even going to get engaged anymore? But they do; they still get engaged, and also there's such a benefit of these unusual gemstones financially over natural gemstones as well.
Definitely. I suppose we've got one last question here, and it's a kind of have you what sort of potential constraints that we've had about delaying in starting and kind of getting the ball rolling on your business? You mentioned about the pandemic, obviously getting everything going just before lockdown 1.0, but was there anything else in particular that you noticed along the way in terms of road bumps?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just bump after bump after bump. It's strange to think about it now. I guess you imagine that things should be going smoothly, and then sometimes they might hit a bump or get a bit rough sometimes. But the whole thing is just a roller coaster, and you're just kind of clinging onto it and hoping for the best. There's no point wishing that it was a smoother path. You just have to grow flexible and adapt to it, if that makes sense. It's only a problem if you make it a problem. It can be a huge. Also, if you see everything as a problem, not to sound too dreamy about it, but I see it so much with COVID at the moment, especially people like pivoting their businesses to online, like online cocktail delivery or whatever. If you spend too much time thinking, oh, woe is me, I'm in this terrible situation, everything's so hard now, you don't keep your eyes open to the huge potential opportunities that it opens up. And then if you can keep a calm demeanor and stay positive but realistic, then you'll see bright spots of opportunity where other people are blind to them, and then you have this huge advantage.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. I suppose it goes with the old saying that smooth seas make for bad sailors.
Yeah, that's an excellent saying. I like that one.
To apply there. I think that's everything that we've come across so far in the chat. Thank you so much for your time, Megan. If anyone else does have any questions for her, please pop them in the chat, and I hope you'll be able to answer them for a little bit longer.